How you guys? Good evening. Just waiting for Akin to jump in. Ah, I see it. So Akin, you have to request. Send a request. Okay. Hey, how you doing,
Yes, going.
man? How's your day? How did it go?
We're
How's
still
the
here, man.
meeting? Still in the meeting, huh?
Still here, man. We're still here. I just ran up. I ran up to do this live.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I think probably be starting in 2 minutes. Supposed to go 8 p.m. sharp. So once it's 8, we'll take off. But I see
Oh,
a few people signing in. Hi, guys. Or maybe we could actually do the introductions before and 8:02 we dive straight in. What do you think?
okay. Sounds like a plan.
Unless the organizers frown at that. Oh, I saw a text. They say, let 8 be 8, please. Okay.
All right. No problem. No problem.
No issues, no issues. But yeah,
Oh man.
tough, huh?
And well, I was going to say you have no idea, but I just realized that yeah, you don't understand how tough this is.
No, people don't know, right? But it's great that we have platforms like this where other people who perhaps don't know the inner workings can learn and sort of learn from our own experience, and hopefully the key thing is hopefully it inspires them to also make that jump, right? And we
Absolutely.
get more of the right people on the inside. That way makes everybody's lives easier, and government can actually deliver service much more efficiently and effectively. That's the wish, because quitting is not an option. It's not an
No,
option.
definitely, definitely not. Okay. Think
Sorry,
good.
yes. Off. Sorry, 1 second.
No worries.
There are a few posts that were supposed to, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so it's 8:01 sharp, and we're about to kick off. Um, I'd like to start by saying good evening to everyone. Thank you all for signing in. My name is Mark Okoye, and I currently serve as the Commissioner for Budget and Economic Planning in Anambra State. I've been at the state level for, I would say, about 8 years, served in 2 administrations in different positions. Prior to that, I was in the private sector, worked in investment banking for AfriInvest. But today is not really about me. It's about the latest, most brand new Commissioner for Finance and Economic Development, Mr. Akin Oyebode. I have him signed in here. So, Akin, I mean, if you could take maybe 2 minutes to introduce yourself, that would be really helpful. Thank you. You have the floor.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So my name is Akin Oyebode. Today I'm Commissioner for Finance and Economic Development at the Ekiti State Government. Before then, I was Special Advisor on Investment, Trade and Innovation, and also Director General of the Ekiti State's Investment Promotion Agency. Primarily, my role there was to drive investment promotion and improve the business environment in Ekiti State. Like Mark, served two governments. Only difference is I've done mine in two different states. Before moving ship to Ekiti, which is my state of origin, as our constitution currently calls it, I served with the Lagos State Government as Executive Secretary and CEO of the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. Before that, I dabbled into finance, did all sorts, investment banking, brand strategy, research. Ultimately, found my home in SME banking, where I was country head of SME banking for Stanbic IBTC. So I guess that's apart from that, um, Mark and I used to be aspiring footballers. He maybe was slightly better than I was, maybe. But yeah, so other than that, it's football, pretty much.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, on your last statement, there's one thing you left out, or maybe two. I think one is that you and I are probably the biggest Manchester United fans you know. That's one. No,
Absolutely.
Number two is that I'm not sure it's slightly better than you. I think significantly. One of those seasons I scored about 20 goals and.
Problem with I try to be charitable now. I mean, we can still again. We can go back to. We can do this again.
Sounds good, man. Akin, I mean, it's nice to have you. It's amazing that we both met ourselves some 12 years ago, and 12 years after, we happen to be driving very critical ministries at our states. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate you for all the antecedents, and obviously the new appointment.
Mark, can you give me a second? I just want to clean my camera.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, all good.
Excellent. So, I mean, enough is enough. It's a network of young Nigerians promoting good governance and citizen engagement for the greater good of the nation and its people. They are the sponsors of this event. They also have co-sponsors, namely Shine Your Eye and also Budget, who've all distinguished themselves in the space that they currently play in. I'd like to welcome you all to a periodic series called The Call of Duty, wherein industry participants across various sectors of the nation's economy are invited to a no-hold-bars conversation around issues, current happenings, transformational ideas within the sector and industry in question. Today's session falls under the government series, and the topic of our conversation is subnational finances. Are we viable? With a total domestic debt of roughly around 4 trillion and external debt of 1.7 trillion, aggregate 5.7 trillion, unemployment, underemployment, poverty rates rising significantly and aggressively, volatility in oil prices, which represents 70% of our income as a nation and 90% of our foreign exchange earnings. I think the answer to that question is very simple. We aren't all viable as we speak. Maybe one or two, depending on how, what sort of calculation, what your viability calculation is, maybe one. But as a unit, as subnationals in the country, we are not viable. But you then layer on the COVID pandemic, its impact on the healthcare systems in the country, the fact that oil prices have dropped significantly from about 42, 43 last week to somewhere around 38, 37 earlier today. The nation is facing significant challenges, and it calls for creative, innovative, bold, difficult, but more importantly, very painful solutions and decisions to help us sort of get out of the current situation, restructure our economy, and perhaps reduce the dependency on oil revenue. So I'll be moderating this session. I introduced myself earlier, and I have an amazing guest who's Akin, who's also introduced himself. Some of the areas we'll be touching would be around economic growth, obviously using Ekiti State as a reference point, the role of technology in boosting revenue administration at the state level. How do we stimulate the private sector so that they can also be a partner in development? These are some of the questions I think we'll try to answer during this conversation. Last but not the least is how do we leverage, can we leverage debt? Is debt an alternative financing sort of an option to explore when thinking of fast-tracking development? So I'd like to start with my first question, and perhaps we'll start in gear 1, gear 2, and slowly build up as the conversation commences. Aki, I've known you many years, from FCMB, Stanbic, etc. A bold statement I'm probably about to make, but I really do believe if you stayed at Stanbic and you were there today, you'd probably be one of the youngest, who'll be celebrating as one of the youngest executive directors within the banking industry in Nigeria today. I know a few people who were under you who claim who currently occupy such positions. I don't think it's too bold a statement to make. But the question here is, why government? Why public service? You had a stint in Lagos with Lagos State Trust Fund, but you took the opportunity to go even further in Ekiti. I understand what that means in terms of a sharp reduction in quality of life, sharper reduction in compensation. How can you rationalize this for me and obviously the other guests who are participants who are in?
So thanks, Mark. Honestly, sometimes I ask myself these questions, right? That look, I could, stay back in Stanbic. So story that I hardly tell. When at the time I was asked to join the Lagos State government, I was actually going to run Standard Bank's Africa SME business, right? So that was my next job. I'd gone through the process. I was effectively just waiting for a work permit to be issued, and then I had that choice, right? But the truth is, I'd always been socially conscious. I've I was lucky enough to have a dad active in civil society, who's always giving me lots of, admittedly, leftist literature to read. But it just made me realize from early on that, government was an important enabler in the quality of all our lives. But more importantly, when I started engaging regulators, etc., I just realized no matter how smart you think you are, no matter how wealthy you become, ultimately, the lock on downward mobility is really how effective the government is. Because there are things you are unable to mobilize your own capital to build, right? Roads, security, healthcare. No matter how wealthy you are, if you have a cardiac arrest in the poshest part of Okoye, you are really still dependent on the public healthcare system to keep you alive till you get to the hospital, So there are things that you can't as an entrepreneur, as a professional, ultimately solve. And for me, it's also, at the time I joined government, it was a clear opportunity to demonstrate that people like you and I, young people, now I'm no longer young, I call myself a young person, young people, potentially middle-class people who are not necessarily seen as politicians, so they think, oh, these guys, they can't get their hands dirty, they they can't roll in the mud. They can't play this game with these guys. I thought it was important for some of us to go in there and just show that it can be done. People generally have a fear of government. They hear civil servants and then they start to shake. I think it was important. I thought it was important that, look, some of us have to go in there and at least demonstrate that this thing can be done some type of way, and hopefully then start to encourage more and more people to join public service. So there's we 30, 40 years ago, people our age ran this country, right? You can argue about how well they ran the country, but they ran it nonetheless. So it's important that we build an army and we build a community, and honestly, when I think about first there's the quality of life question that you are going to have to take back, because quality of life in Adoeke, very high quality.
Yes, of course.
Because the quality of air that I gain here, the peace of mind, lack of traffic, etc., to be honest, compensates a lot for some of the income that I had to forego. But ultimately, coming to Ekiti for me was a call of duty, right? And I felt that, again, no disrespect to Lagos, but I didn't think that if I left Lagos, Lagos will miss me that much, right? It, for me, was an opportunity, a smaller state, most importantly, a principal that I trust a lot, to give me the freedom to do certain things. And it was a leap of faith. Of course, there are difficulties with family, etc. But I mean, we're here, we're still standing. I don't regret the decision at all. And I mean, I think that ultimately, right, the work that we both do, you in Anambra, me in Ekiti, Mohammed in Kaduna, where all of a sudden, we're building a community of people who are, significantly under 50, able to hold fairly senior, fairly important roles in government. And so hopefully the next generation of leaders come out of some of the work we've done.
No, thank you. Thanks for that very comprehensive response. I think there's already a debate around quality of life between our participants. There's a lady called Oludi Star who's an ardent supporter of Ekiti State, and I completely do agree with your point. I think when I moved down here to Anambra State, when I wake up in the morning and take a jog, I feel like a lot more oxygen actually gets into my lungs. I can actually plan my day. So if I told someone I would see you at 10 and it was 10 minutes before, I knew it would be 10 minutes from my house to my office, versus sort of what I would experience where just going from Lekki to Ikoyi for work could take you 2 hours in 2008. But many people don't remember. But I do agree with that point, and I do hear some of the things you've said. But I would like to dive a bit deeper into sort of this reason and rationale for coming, and to ask a question that is taken for granted in my view, because typically the people who handed the baton over to us would tell you that nothing in private sector prepares you for what you see in Nigerian government or Nigerian politics. I strongly disagree. I really do think that it doesn't necessarily give you all the ingredients to succeed, but it gives you fundamentals to help survive and bring a breath of fresh air, bring new ideas coming into governance, especially at the subnational level, where we are very fungible and flexible, in my own view, rather than the big ship at federal, which might take a year to make a left turn. At state level, if everybody's plugged in, you can sort of you can move with ease and speed. So my question is really, what's your experience on your end? How has your private sector career sort of prepared you for some of what you've seen in the public sector?
Thanks. I think that's a very interesting question. So there are different elements of my career that prepared me for different experiences in public service. Now, when I was, for example, at Stanbic IBTC, I had to set up the bank's SME banking business, right? So it was pretty much I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi is just acting funny. But it was pretty much a startup within government, right? And 4 or 5 years down the line, I had to then start up the Employment Trust Fund from scratch. right? So just having that startup experience was important, right? Just understanding how to build a business. Admittedly, this isn't like starting up, you know, uh, Paystack or Flutterwave, right? I had Standard Bank behind me, right? So it was a much easier job. At the Employment Trust Fund, I had the Lagos State government behind me, right? But just understanding governance frameworks, or hiring people, allowing them to thrive and work and operate, etc. So I had some leadership experience, right? So it wasn't my first leadership role, so that helped. But today, you know, I have a slightly different role because when I came to Ekiti, I also
This is why I asked
investment.
the question.
So starting up the investment promotion agency in Ekiti wasn't so difficult, right? Because again, it was LSCTF kind of all over again, right? So similar principles, similar philosophies. Again, fairly easy. Today, I now have a ministry, right? You know, so of course a different ball game, right? And you know what I like about it is again, I like to take risks, but I like to take calculated risks, right? So moving from private government was effectively moving from one SME type role to another,
Yeah.
right? So yes, it was public sector, but it was stuff I had done up till like the day before I left, right? Now, because I had been in government, coming into a kitty wasn't that difficult, right? Again, the public servants are at a high level. You know, I mean, it's not like there was a significant difference between the civil servants in Lagos and the ones that have engaged here. Similar people, and you know, the thing is, there's also this misnomer that civil servants don't know anything, which I find like laughable, right? Um, but going to the Ministry of Finance was good after 2 years, right? If I had taken this job 2 years ago, it would have been a completely different conversation, right? But I had some experience. I knew how the state ran. Um, I also had worked very closely with the Ministry of Finance. So I'll give you a quick story. So, I mean, I'm running the SIFTAS program. So that's Fiscal Transparency and Accountability Program for those of you in the audience. And that program is a fairly difficult one, you know, program, right? So, but because I had been part of the SIFTAS community as advisor on investments, I knew all the indicators, I knew all the requirements for Ekiti to earn, the required grants, etc. It was fairly easy to move overnight, right, and not need like a briefing to start work. So ultimately, you know, I think the one thing that I wasn't prepared for, though, was the high quality of the civil service, right? And you could argue about the size of the civil service at national and subnational level. It's a good argument to have. But I think that the one argument that I find very interesting is like, oh, everybody there is just like nobody knows anything. You know, it's such a lame argument to make because when you delve into the quality of the people there are quite a number of people operating at a very high level, you know, that will hold their own in the private sector easily. So for me, I think the first thing that helps, just recognizing that look, there's stuff to work with here if you want to do the work. And in many instances, you know, people tend to take the shape of the leadership, right? So if they have a political appointee who signals, I'm not here to do any work, I'm just here for a good time, right? Then people are just going to be like, okay, well, these 4 years, we're here for a good time. But if they see someone who's like, we want to reform, we want to do stuff, there are people who will come to you on the side and say to you, hey, you know, we really want to do this stuff with you. You know, we really want to join this, you know. So I guess it's really down to you as an individual. You quickly recognize that the one thing that, you know, and I think this is a power distance index issue with Nigeria, is that people defer to leaders a lot more than they should. So that's the only weakness that you see in the civil service, but it's also a weakness you see in the private sector. You know, I don't think it's any different from any institution in Nigeria where you find that people just generally defer to leaders. You know, by it's the default position to hold. You know, it's almost the same way you can't question your parents. It's almost the same way an older person doesn't tell a lie. You know, these are ingrained cultural biases that we see manifest in either government or the private sector. But ultimately, I think, I mean, it was a good, Stanbic was a good place to learn because my school, please no disrespect, but Stanbic was like a ministry. You know, the approval process was very lengthy, very difficult. So the bureaucracy in government, I wasn't really worried about the bureaucracy in government because I was coming from a fairly bureaucratic bank in any event.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I do agree with most of the points you made. And I also think from your sort of response, I think it's clear that Ekiti's civil service is also ranks up there in terms of competence, capacity, because and what you would see is that perhaps if you looked inwards and saw what happened over the years, there probably was a deliberate effort by government prior to this year to invest in people. One thing I found when I went into the ministry, because I also spent about 2.5 to 3 years in the investment promotion agency, then I went to the ministry. I realized that civil servants are very interesting people. The first time you meet them, they're so used to people who do not really care about their welfare, care about their growth, care about their development. So their view is another guy has come. What's the plan? What's the memo we're writing? Where are we sharing the money? Let's keep moving. Versus when you come in with a breath of fresh air and with the view that you want to transform, you want to reform, you have certain goals and milestones that you like to achieve, you see a different reaction from that 20%, which in my view will end up doing the work for the 80%. You know, that's sort of what I'm seeing in my experience. But let's take the conversation up a couple gears. You stepped into your ministry, was it last week or the week before? You stepped into your ministry, Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, Day 1. The PEMSEC and directors, they typically would give you a grand welcome to the ministry. The story of the appointment, especially how you were confirmed by the House of Assembly, is probably making the rounds on the radio and domestic media. For many people, Akin has made it in a different way, Akin don't hammer. But very few people understand the challenge. And obviously right now, I'm not trying to sort of criticize our states, but it is what it is. You have a population of 3.5 to 4 million people, depending on what projections you see, an unemployment rate of 15%, underemployment 23%. IGR figure for last year was 8.5 billion, places Ekiti 29th out of 36 states in Nigeria. And a capital expenditure budget implementation rate of somewhere around 32.5%. This is enough to give one a migraine that never goes away. But obviously, we were trained, we have chosen to sort of take the risk and serve. What plan does Ekiti State have with you sort of running the very strategic ministry to first of all get a hold of this situation and hopefully put in place structures, policies, plans, projects, programs to help transform the state's economy and start delivering and impact the lives of the people over the coming years?
Okay, thanks, Mark. First thing is I said to people, I should be accepting their commiseration. Because I mean, congratulating someone for being Commissioner of Finance in a period of fiscal volatility is I mean, yeah, I'm scratching my head because it's a tough job.
Okay, you can comment also.
Yeah. So they won, right? So they won. Everyone who's been owed by government is calling me, right? Everyone with a voucher or a warrant that has not been paid is saying, Honorable Commissioner, which is a title I absolutely dislike, by the way. Honorable Commissioner, my voucher is on your table, my this is at your desk, I need to do this, we need to do that, so that's day one, and it doesn't stop, it only increases. Better than most. Finance commissioners, when they start, end up with 100 friends. By the time they're leaving, they're lucky to have one, right? Because it's like when you want to pay, it's like when you go and ask your folks for money, right? Anything that doesn't result in that money coming out is a waste of your time, right? No matter how nice they are, no matter how well they pat you on the back and hug you, no money is bad news, right? So where do we want to see Ekiti? I mean, I think for me, it's really helping the state fund some of its what I'll consider high impact development, right? So our special agriculture processing zone, leveraging the agrarian communities in Ekiti, it's effectively saying how do we fund the irrigation to improve productivity in the states? How do we support land clearing, land titling, etc., opening up land banks and helping people unlock capital, right, from land which is today a dead asset, right? So how do we fund a GIS project that allows us to geotag land banks and also provide, quick access to titles, those kind of things. So how do we ensure that Ekiti is a landlocked state, right? How do we ensure that we get Ekiti connected, build better roads, potentially think about alternative modes of transportation? We get 26 megawatts from the national grid, right? How do we improve the quality and the quantity of power that comes into the state? And with our fiscal challenges, how do we start to use our balance sheet a lot better, right? Instead of the state undertaking a number of these projects, one of my own key, if you ask me, what are the 3 or 4 things I want to do? One is saying, establish, a rainy day fund, right? So put some money aside, no matter how little, and just have the discipline of setting that money aside, and ultimately use that money to then unlock investments, right? So instead of building a power plant, right? If I had 2 billion in a sinking fund or in a savings account, I could easily tell an IPP that, look, this is a capability guarantee, payment guarantee. If your revenue drops below X, then I will fund the gap from obviously cash that I have in reserve. So doing things like that for me would be one. 2 is just even automating a lot of the processes, right? So I have a ton of, if I turn this camera around, I have a ton of files around me. I'm literally buried under a pile of files. What's important for me now is how do we digitize some of these processes? How do we have better dashboards and better reporting? Just to make the process a lot easier for people. Obviously, we can't go from IGR, right? So ultimately, it's easy for me. The first target is how do we get from 8.5 to 12 billion, right? So starting day one, I want to be able to say, by 2021, we're easily now doing a minimum of 1 billion a month, and a lot of these things are really, people say it's not really rocket science, right? It's really just plugging basic leakages, right? Eliminating cash as a mode of payment, right? Collecting using, seamless, standardized technology. Those are the kind of things that I'm really interested in. But ultimately, the finance commissioner, I always say, is an enabler, right? At the end of the day, the job is really how do we put people in jobs? How do we ensure that the quality of healthcare improves in the state? How do we improve basic education? So I definitely have my biases. I definitely have areas where I think that government should spend more money. And my role is just saying, how do we start to find, funding pools to support some of these things? But last but not the least, because again, if it's not because of budget and EIE, it's not because it's not very important. I think it's transparency and openness around government, around public financial management, right? Just ensuring that people have access to our budgets, they can query those budgets, they know how their money is being spent, they know how their taxes are being spent, and so one of the things that I would easily commit to is that full adherence to the Freedom of Information Act, right? If you send us an FOI request, in 72 hours we should respond to you, so that's really, I think, for me, the 3 or 4 things that I'll say will be the focus. But I mean, the point is, Akin hasn't hammered, finance commissioner doesn't mean that money to give to your family. And for people like Ebuka to win a giveaway, Mark and I are public servants. We have nothing to give you but our problems. So it's really not the job that people think it is. It's the glamour of being a commissioner, being responsible for a ministry is actually a burden of leadership, right? It's a burden knowing that in my case, there are 3.5 million people who depend on the quality of decisions that I make or I contribute to, So for me, that burden is what keeps me up at night.
No, very, 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 very well responded. I think I'll touch on one or two of the points you made, where you talked about establishing a rainy day fund, even in spite of the current difficulties and challenges. Because if you can, let's take it back to basics. If anyone who's in their house in the Nigeria that we live in today, right? Rising inflation, rising prices, increasing poverty, people are losing jobs. If you can still find a way to save a portion of your income, that only sort of that prepares you for when you have the slush funds, the slush errors, and that way you can put a lot more away and therefore start deploying to create income down the line. One example I had that I wanted to share was in Anambra State. We had, obviously, we created the Anambra Investment Promotion Agency, which I served as the pioneer executive director. And I recall, speaking to NIPCL and asking them, telling them that I spent the last 2 years under Governor Peter Obi chasing foreign direct investment. And you get to some of these meetings in different parts of the world, and they're asking you questions like, well, how far is your state from Nairobi? I'm like, well, it is not even the same. It's not the same region. It's not the same country. So the batting average is so low. And when you do get a large investment like we did with South Miller of $250 million, you find out that the entire operation is run by 10 to 15 people because it's high tech, right? So what did we try to do? We completely redesigned the strategy. And I believe we coined this word, domestic direct investments, which your former colleague, Yewande stole, not stole, took, borrowed, lent.
I'll report
Don't
you.
report me, she's my big auntie. But we said we have a comparative advantage there. There's high net worth individuals in Anambra State who have some emotional attachment to the state, and they also do know that there's a large population of a middle class in this state. But why can't they invest? Simply because 20 years they haven't gotten their CFO, the permits, and what have you. So we came in there and very quickly unbundled this and made it seamless. Today, I still recall when we made the payment, 300 million to Coast Farms. Today, he creates about 1,000 jobs. We get dividends. From the South Miller investments last year, they paid about a 300 million, 400 million dividend back to the state. This was an investment made 6-7 years ago. So I think that's one area that if young people come in with the right experience from the private sector, can think of these very creative means to create sustainable income streams for the state. But we've talked about one side of the equation, which is how to sort of raise revenue. But I'd like us to talk about the other side of the equation. I recall at the start of Anambra State, the administration in Anambra, we had a very huge pension bill. One simple thing he said is, no, we're not going to pay. We're going to pay everybody by check. And that pension bill dropped from about 700 million a month to roughly around 250 million a month, saving us about 60% on a monthly basis. The devil is always in the detail in recurrent expenditure, right? You have your personnel costs, which don't really move. You have the overheads, which is where there's a lot of fat and one could play around with. Then you have this holy grail called social benefits that has gratuities and pensions, where there's also certain games in there. Mm-hmm. How are you going to, what are your ideas? What's the agenda? How do you intend to deconstruct the problem and then solve?
Great stuff. One of the things I've learned with this thing is, we've also got to do a lot of peer learning, right? So, I'm very shameless, I've copied from Anambra, I've copied from Kaduna, I've copied from Kebbi, and ultimately it saves us the time to start to, experiment, etc. So for me, there are a bunch of things. The first thing is discipline around budget preparation. So for me, the start is, and the point I've tried to make is for 2021, we're going to keep our recurrent expenditures flat, right? Now, if you adjust that for inflation, in a 12 to 14% inflationary environment, that's really just that's a cut, right? So that's a real cut in expenditure. When you start with that, people have to align with it. We are doing some work today with pension and gratuity obligations, right? So we owe quite a bit in gratuity payment. And my view is, look, I'm the son of a university teacher. My mother spent 35 years in public service. So I respect the fact that these people have worked so hard and deserve their gratuity payments, right? So one of the things that we do here is start to issue promissory notes to these pensioners, and they can of course go and then discount these promissory notes with financial institutions, right? But part of that promissory note issue is to ensure that we do the verification, right? How do we verify these pensioners? How do we weed out? And this thing is a continuous process. I always tell people that, look, if you do a verification today, by next year, people are adding new guys, right? The people who came for this quarter's verification, next quarter, they might not even be able to make it, to the location for the verification. So you have situations where, of course, there are people who are working in 3 or 4 local governments, right? And they're drawing a salary from like multiple locations. So for me, it's constantly saying we will continue to do this stuff. It's almost like a whack-a-mole strategy, but we'll constantly use biometric verification to weed out, the facts in payroll. And when you do that like 3 or 4 times, you generally know where the thing levels out. With things like social benefits, for me, gratuity, etc., it's something that you're going to have a plan for, right? You can't offset 15-16 billion of gratuity obligations in 2 years, right? So you're going to have a 4 or 5 year, and constantly over time, in 5 or 6 years, you'll be down to now everyone who's on the contributory pension schemes. So the good thing about those kind of pension and gratuity things is that there's a terminal date, right? So you know that by a certain year, these people aren't. I mean, the pension scheme has changed, right? So you know that these payments are going to fall away. The one thing that I find very interesting, I mean, on my side, is just the concept of running grants. It's a very interesting concept because at the end of the day, you pay salaries, you pay MDAs, running grants, etc. And you just find that, some of the expenses can be centralized, right? So in state governments, in secretariats, you see all these I better pass my neighbor generators, and you're asking yourself, why the heck do you have 200 generators in a secretariat complex, right? Because you could easily have one power plant in there, whether it's a 3 megawatt or 4 megawatt plant, you have one power plant in there providing electricity across the complex, and ultimately you are saving yourself the cost of running tiny generators and diesel petrol costs that you can't manage, right? That becomes a scam, right? So that it's a running scam. So there are some of those things that for me we can centralize, and that for me is how we're going to have to rein in costs. But the real point for me is, if you keep costs flat, say to yourself, we're going to keep this thing flat this year. Trust me, the government is going to run, right? And unfairly. And the truth at the end of the day is we also need to sort of cut our coat according to our cloth, right? Because there are some expenses that are hard coded, and I always say to people that I'm not here for jokes, right? So when someone says the civil service is bloated, why don't you fire people? It's the daftest thing you can do. Because you sack the people today, someone comes in tomorrow, he campaigns against you, he says, my campaign promise is I'm going to reinstate everybody that was fired, right? Mm-hmm. Get all the votes, he will kick you out of office. The following week, he has rehired those people, you've lost an election, and your reforms didn't stick. So my view of public service is just put a freeze on employment and start to propose people, right? So if you say, hey, I've shut down this parastatal, you might need teachers somewhere, right? So post the ones that can teach into teaching roles, So those are the kind of things that I would say that, look, it's the longer term for me view of how to rein in costs. But I'm clear in my mind, and you made this great point around budget performance, etc. I'm also clear in my mind that the budgeting process, working with my colleague, the Commissioner of Budget and Economic Planning, is going to be a realistic budget, right? So I'm not going to run a process where someone is going to say, as Finance Commissioner, the capital budget only performed 25%, right? From day one, anything I cannot fund, if you put it, I will disagree with you, right? So that there's activity around it, and it happens not just government, even in the private sector. People think budgeting is a joke, right? So they generally think, it's just a statement of intent. When we start the thing, we can then do as we please. So having that discipline for me is super important, and that would be my priority.
Excellent, Akin. I'm enjoying this. We've talked about both sides of the equation. I'm going to go to a slightly sensitive area and be eager to see what the views of our participants what they would think. So the lead-on question would be around optimizing taxation. And with taxation, there's obviously your revenue head, your revenue windows, but there's also the tax base of the states, right? How many taxpayers actually pay tax? And this is always a very sensitive topic in Nigeria. On one hand, with a tax to GDP ratio of barely 5% nationally, the government and development partners, World Bank, all of these guys are of the opinion that Nigerians don't pay taxes or don't pay enough taxes. They tell us that our counterparts in South Africa do 28% of GDP, Morocco does 27% of GDP, Togo, next to us, does 21%, Ghana 14%, Mali, with all their issues, 17% tax to GDP. While on the other hand, majority of Nigerians feel they suffer from multiple taxation and government ought to look inwards. This same inwards where we can't quite find more revenue, but they expect us to look inwards to find revenue to address critical developmental issues. How do you intend to tackle this dilemma as you proceed as Commissioner for Finance in Ekiti?
Okay, thanks. Guys, leave Lagos State alone now. There's no Lagos State person here.
Leave Lagos.
Lagos. I think honestly, there's efficiency, there are efficiency issues, and there's definitely how we collect, right? So I think one of the things that we don't do well is we don't collect efficiently. So, Kenya has this great thing where they bundle all these taxes into one levy. They come once, they assess you once, you get billed once, and that's it, right? It's now the job of the government to distribute those taxes and levies to the different arms of government. If you take something like land use charge, right? There's ground rent, there's tenement rates, there's the neighborhood development levy. There's no need to go there 3 times to collect what you can effectively collect once and share across the 3 tiers of government. So that's the first thing. The second thing for me is we generally are very good at payee and payee-related taxes, right? So there's almost like a high cost of being formalized. And so you find that we're unable to collect from the informal sector. So all the people here are saying, hey, we pay taxes, we're all taxpayers, which is great. Many of the people work, right? So these things are taxed upfront, right? You buy food at high-end restaurants, right? You shop at boutiques, you do all these things within a formal context. Therefore, you will pay all the necessary taxes and levies. The challenge is we aren't taxing the informal sector at all. And fundamentally, that is where the problem is, right? The problem is how do we ensure that, for example, road transport, Okadas, buses, taxis, are paying those taxes and levies to the government, not to some ragtag unions, right? So one of the things that we are doing in Ekiti is that we've partnered with Max.ng, and Max is now going to come to our state to enumerate and help with improving revenue collections from one area of the informal sector. For me, that's just a pilot and proof of what can happen if we do this correctly. One of the things we're doing with tax reforms in Ekiti as well is if you register as a taxpayer and we have your mobile number, we will let you know when your employer remits on your behalf, right? So it's one of the things that people don't know. That look, sometimes people the taxes are deducted, but the employer isn't remitting, right? And then it's when you want to buy a house at some point, you realize that, or you want to do something, you realize that, oh, this guy has been deducting taxes for 5 years, but not a dime was remitted, right? So it also encourages whistleblower activity, where if you see that your tax has been deducted, but you're not getting an alert that says this has been paid on your behalf, then you're encouraged to call us to say, hey, my employer is deducting this stuff, but he's not remitting to government. I think for me, that's the first place to go to, right? Just ensuring that we get compliance from what I'll call the small to medium size enterprises. So that's step one. Step two is you've got to think about taxes have to follow the economic profile of the country, right? So you can't have an economy that is heavily agrarian, right? So if you think about contribution to GDP, right, agriculture is a significant contributor to GDP. One of the things that helps you see the misnomer is if you align the size, sectoral size, with the tax collections, right? You see that there's a lot of misalignment, right? So a sector like agriculture, which is a major driver of growth, which is a major driver of the country's economy, contributes next to nothing in taxes, right? So we've got to figure out how do we tax the agricultural sector a bit better, you know? I mean, back in the day, you know, the regions did a good job of it, right? You know, they had these rangers that went around, and you know, and they had these produce boards, etc. And they basically administered those things. Sometimes they even collected the taxes in crops, right? And so just ensuring that we can figure that bit out better. In my state, for example, we've never collected land use charge, you know. So this is an easy way of just saying, let's deepen, you know, revenues by even just saying this is a tax that everyone pays. But I think for me, you know, the second part of that conversation is then the people also then need to be a lot more politically active, right? Because if you then pay taxes, you know, all these Lagosians, they are all here saying we pay taxes, but on election, the boys are watching football, you know, the young people are playing video games, you know, some people think it's the day to go to the salon, some people think it's the day to just chill. So you then start asking, what are our taxes being used for? But when you have the opportunity to speak, right, as a citizen, you don't speak, right? You don't speak when local government elections happen. You know, you don't speak when state elections happen. You speak on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. The only way you are going to change that narrative is if you vote. And I always say to people, when they say, oh, elections are rigged, etc., blah, 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 the easiest stop rigging is to just go out and vote. Just go out and just vote, right? Because that's the only way you hold people like us accountable, right? If you think you haven't used your taxes correctly, then vote us out of government. It's very simple. I mean, that for me is the simplest thing, you know. So the citizen's responsibility includes paying taxes, right? It also, but it includes paying taxes. If you're unhappy about how your taxes are spent, then go and change that at the ballot box, you know, ultimately. So that for me is the final point. But as a state government, are we going to enforce the taxes that we're allowed to collect? Absolutely.
I completely agree with you, Akin, and I have come across this because I once chaired the Revenue Administration Committee in the state in Anambra, and we did come across a lot of these issues. So I've seen a number of issues in the comments. People say informal sector doesn't pay taxes. There's legitimacy issues. I actually believe informal sector pay more taxes than the organized sector.
Yep.
But what we don't know or what we don't realize is that the people who tax the informal sectors are usually agents or people who work within the local. And many states have struggled to crack that issue to ensure. I mean, walk to the hairdresser in Yanikwaja. She'll tell you how much she pays every month or every day. Or going to any of the major markets in Onitsha and pick up a wheelbarrow. They'll tell you there's wheelbarrow tax, there's carrying food and materials things. You come into the market, you leave, all sorts of things. These things exist, but we have to find ways to sort of checkmate them. One thing we did that I think was quite interesting is that we took everything that was concerning taxes and a database of taxpayers. We pushed it out the door and we started to build a clean database. We started this exercise 2 years ago. Today we have 280,000 people captured in the database. And we also ensured that there's something we call a toll gating policy. Why? Because essentially, if you want any sort of service from the state, it must be linked to your Anambra State Social Services ID card. That's number one. Number two, what that then does is that when our guys early this year started to mine this data, we came across people who, on paper, they earn 50,000 naira a year. But because we've linked it to the Motor Vehicle Administration database, they've just registered 2 Prados in the first quarter of the year. We've linked it to Ministry of Land. We can see that they have over 3 hectares of strategically positioned land within the capital and other key cities in the state. Immediately, we had to call him for negotiation. This same guy who was paying us 25,000 for his tax certificate every year, this year, without revealing names, he owed 63 million because he declared 400 million naira in taxes. We have a major problem around tax evasion from the people who this country has done very well for, but choose not to pay taxes. Taxes, in my view, is the social contract between the people and the government. You pay your taxes, it's government's responsibility to allocate it to various sectors to ensure that the economy continues to grow and create jobs. But we're running out of time. We have maybe another 10 minutes left. I have a few more questions, and I'll probably ask 1 or 2. But we have a question tab, and I see 2 questions there. If there's any question you would like to ask Akin, his experience, his sort of what he's working on, his views, please put it in the questions tab. So that I don't have to look through the different comments. The next question I'm going to discuss, or I'm going to bring to bear, is one that if I don't, I probably would not be able to go back home. My wife will send me home, because I looked at a couple of research reports from Oxfam International Reports, and it says in Nigeria, women represent between 60 to 79% of Nigeria's rural labor force. But at the same time, they are 5 times less likely to own their own land than men. And owning your land in agriculture, especially given sort of where the country is, some of the funding programs available, your land is your gold, it's your collateral, it's your only way to get funding and inputs to sort of expand your operation as a rural farmer. But there's also a quote by Barbara Bush where she says, to empower a woman is to empower her children, her family, and her community. The smartest investment we can make is a woman. A woman must have the freedom and possibility to decide who they are and who they want to be. How, is your government, how is the cabinet sort of thinking around bridging this gender and income inequality gap, and essentially building a society where women and vulnerable groups can contribute equitably to the growth of Ekiti's economy?
So that's a slam dunk question for me. I can boldly say that Ekiti leads Nigeria on gender matters. We've domesticated all sorts of laws I can start whether it's domestic violence, whether it's access to finance, whether it's land ownership, for example, for us is fairly straightforward, right? So men and women have equal opportunities to land ownership, right? We have a very strong gender team. Our SDG office, our office of the wife of the governor, very active on gender issues. So whether it's from a lawmaking perspective, things like ensuring that sexual offenders go to prison. We have the first in Nigeria, sexual offenders register, right? And it's not a register in name, right? It's a register that works. We publish these names in the open. We send people to prison, sometimes life in prison, for domestic violence and sexual, in fact, for sexual offenses especially. So just from a because this thing starts from protection, right? Before you talk about economic opportunities, we have to start with protection. We're also very keen to educate the girl child. You know, my view on girl child education is, and it's a difficult issue. Population growth is a difficult issue. But the driver of population growth for me is the fact that women get, you know, the age of childbearing is too young for most women, right? So if a woman starts to bear children from 16, when she's not even an adult, she's going to end up with 6 or 7 kids, right? Ultimately, and earn no income. So for us in Ekiti, we're very clear about how do we create opportunities for our women. All our micro enterprise programs today are very clearly focused on achieving at least 50% access to women, right? So whether it's land administration, whether it's access to finance, whether it's protection in terms of domestic violence, etc., even up to elderly women, you know, protection of the old, the poor and vulnerable. I mean, we could spend 1 hour talking about the work we do around gender equality. So again, it's not like a joke. We're like when it comes to gender equality and gender matters. But we have 2 minutes left, so I don't want to waste all that time to speak about it. But I can speak about it in detail.
Okay, so there's so many questions. I'll just select one. I'll start by selecting one, and it's from a gentleman called CK, and he says, Akin, what are your top 3 agendas in this new role within the next 24 months? I think that has been answered to an extent. He asked that question 46 minutes ago.
Do you think we can come back for 15 more minutes?
What is it?
Can we come back for 15 more minutes if the live ends? I can see all the comments saying.
Yeah, does the live actually end? This is actually my first time using this. I don't know the live.
It'll end in a minute, so we can do like 15 more minutes.
Okay, so I'll definitely start it again. I will do 15
minutes.
Cool. Right. Or do I just end it? Maybe I just end it. Then
don't worry.
Just keep. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a question around people often from Medota. He says people often see debt as a negative thing, but it isn't. How can we leverage debt in equity for economic transformation?
You know, the one thing about debt is it's what you use it for, right? So I'm not upset about taking loans. I won't shy away from going to the capital markets. What is important is Mark, you have to save, or you have to save the video. I see everybody saying, please save it, save video. So,
yeah, we'll save it. Well,
I guess you. Yeah, save it now.
Doesn't quite give me the option. Okay, I have to end the video, then save it. Maybe.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Hi, Austin. Hi, Oyebode. How you doing? I am Zia Bukar. Banky. Banky was surprised when I gave you that story on Twitter, Abby. So, Akin, if you sign in and you request to join the video, then we take it from there. Excellent. Oh, hi. Excellent. So for those who had joined maybe at the end or halfway through, couldn't catch the introduction, just a quick one. This is a series, the governance series of the Enough is Enough a call to duty. And the topic and the theme for today's discussion is really subnational finances. Are we all viable? And over the last 1 hour, we've Akin has graciously taken questions concerning revenue, increasing revenue, reducing costs, his sort of agenda coming into office, his personal belief and opinion and views on why he took this risk and went into public service. And we were just we had just started discussion around debt and its sustainability. So Akin, over to you for us to continue. Thank you.
Okay, great stuff. So I was saying that we have this thing where we just generally look at debt as a problem. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we've had is just what do we utilize the debt for? It's important as government that we mainly go to the markets to raise capital where we know that we can earn a fairly decent return. At the very least, cost recovery has to be, it has to be fiscally neutral, is what I like to say. That if I'm putting that money in a GIS project that helps me earn over 5 to 6 years, I can recover the cost of that project. I can pay off my loan fairly easily. So, I mean, we're in a place where fiscally we're in trouble. We are spending a lot more money on healthcare, right? We have to spend more money on even just social benefits, things like palliatives, etc., for the people. So the states are in a fiscal mess, right? But what is very important is what do you use the money for? Culturally, in parts of this country, people don't like to borrow, right? They'll rather run a small business than take a loan. Look, I ran SME banking for a bank, right? There were great businesses I used to convince. I used to beg them, like, this money will help you treble this business in 2 years, But they like, no, I've never borrowed in my life. Like, it's a thing of pride, like, I've never taken a loan in my life. I'll never take a loan. Like, nobody gives you an award for never taking a loan, right? So the one thing I would like people to do is to scrutinize the utilization of these proceeds, both at national and subnational level. It's important to scrutinize the utilization of proceeds of these loans, right? The one thing that we should do is to take loans to pay salaries or to fund the cost of government, right? But where the money is going, very clear capital projects, especially those where there's some cost recovery, I mean, I think that it's a no-brainer. So that's my view on that.
I completely agree with you, Aki. I think, in my view and in my experience, I don't really think the right questions are asked at subnational level and at national level. I think just when you see the sort of excitement from different members within the cabinet and perhaps even civil servants across ministries, both at federal and subnational, when a new World Bank program commences and everybody runs and they jump onto the the conference call and they're asking, what are everything you need me to do? I need to sign to get this money. They're not asking the right questions. They're not asking, why am I borrowing? What are the terms? Do I need the money? What sectors will give me the return on investment that allows me and enables me pay these monies back? Many a times, we don't know what we are signing, whether it's a grant or it's an aid or it's a credit or it's a long-term credit with a 10-year moratorium, all sorts of things, but we're just signing and signing. So that's something that we definitely have to redesign in Anambra State and say, yes, World Bank, they remember that they're all bankers. They are giving credit. They're paid bonuses based on how much disbursements they make, and not necessarily the impact of of every single dollar they disburse. That's, in my view, if more of us across the country understand these issues, and why the sort of mindset behind the people who offer these monies to us, then we probably would be making better decisions. There's nothing wrong with a $200 million debt portfolio if that was put into a light rail, a river port project that is generating 20-30% increase in IGR, in my view. But let's take on a couple questions. There's from, she says, can you see it?
Yeah. If someone brings a Ghana must go back filled with cash, that I can't see all of it, but
I can.
Yeah.
She said,
so
yeah.
The one thing I say about these things about corruption and graft, etc., is, rejecting a Ghana must go back is the easiest thing, right? It's so easy. it's a no-brainer. For me, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, like, honestly, at the end of the day, like, how much is the Ghana must go back? What's it going to add to my life, right? At best, it's going to buy a car. At best, it'll fund a holiday. I mean, like, maybe you'll buy a watch that I've always wanted to own. But like, for me personally, I'm a man of like, I don't have like big. I mean, like my wealth creation aspirations are not huge. I don't want to live in a 500 mansion, right? So I mean, as long as I can send my kids to school, I can put, regardless of the currency, I mean, bring it in dollars, I don't give a toss, right? Pounds, whatever it is. Where the cost, you see, corruption isn't really just Ghana must go back, right? It's really when there's something that is so important to you, right? And that's where the test of who you are actually just comes through, right? So sometimes you find a situation where it's not a Ghana must go back, but I always use a classic ethics question, right? Where you sit before maybe an assembly, right? Or a legislative house. And someone says to you, well, you want to get this COVID-19 test kits, right? You want to save 1 million lives. And you need to get medicines to 1 million kids, right? And for me to approve this budget, you are going to have to give me 20 million naira, right? And so, you are now faced with a very significant set of choices. One is, do you move your moral compass and pay that guy the 20 million naira bribe? Or do you say, I have this strong moral compass, I won't pay bribes, and the price of not paying that bribe is effectively losing 100,000 kids that year? That's really the test, and that's really where, the difficult conversations happen. Nobody's going to bring a Ghana must go back to your office like when the first person brings it and you throw it away. Nobody else brings it. So I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think that these things are as straightforward as that. If sometimes the issues are as straightforward as that, very few people will be openly corrupt, right? The real issue you find is public service and things like procurement processes, etc., are fairly problematic processes, right? And there's always going to be the risk that you run foul of one of these processes. So I'll give you an example. I have files on my desk, right? Some of those files are 180 pages per file, right? Now, if you bring that file to me at 8:30 p.m., I'm tired, I've worked all day, but the thing has to be approved tonight. It always has to be approved tonight. The problem is that I'm going to sign something one day where if they ask the guy, why did you pay this money? He will say, but my commissioner signed it, right? And then you then get hauled in front of EFCC and they say, oh, why did you sign this thing? So I have this policy. I tell people that many people have gone to Alagmo because they signed something standing, right? So you can't bring something to me. I'm rushing for a meeting. You're like, oh, please just sign this quickly, right? I'm like, you know what? I only sign things sitting down, right? When I can read the stuff properly, when my brain is still fresh. Because at the end of the day, quite a number of people, it's not really like open corruption. I tell people it's not open corruption. It's not Ghana must go corruption. No. Corruption comes in different ways. It comes in trade-offs. It comes in difficult choices. And look, I'm not here to sort of tell people what they want to hear. The reality of this conversation is that those choices are tough. And sometimes you are going to be faced with choices that you might not like on the day, but you might just have to make because there's a greater good. So again, I think everyone just has to find their moral compass, right? But to answer your question, Stella, it's very easy to say to you, Ghana must go back. You and your bag will be thrown out of my office.
No, I definitely agree. It's an interesting question. And in responding, one is thinking through different sort of areas and facets of how to respond to the question to ensure it's properly captured. I think on that matter, I only have to say one thing. In the job we do, right? Either as Commissioner of Finance, more as Commissioner of Finance, and also as Commissioner of Budget, right? More than likely, between now and the end of your tenure, you will be invited to EFCC or ICPC. It's happened to me, it will happen to every other person who occupies these seats. Now, what that whole idea about ensuring your moral compass is in check is that it allows you walk into those organizations with confidence. The ability to go in there, sit down, they say, write your statement, you write your statement, say, okay, can I leave? And they say, yes, you can leave. When your integrity is impaired, and perhaps why they called you're culpable, or you saw it and sort of let it pass, then you're facing the heat. Getting people to go to EFCC is the simplest thing in Nigeria. All you need is one person who does not exist writing a petition and is dumped there, and you're getting the invite tomorrow. It happens to. I don't know if perhaps these sort of discussions occur every day, but in my view, I'm letting it out of the bag. I'm telling people how it is. This is part of the risk you sign up to. That's one. Number two, on corruption, I think Stella said something about, will you report the person and how do you intend to battle it? We can choose to give you sort of answers that sound good and tell you, I'll write a memo to the corruption panel in the state and take that person's name and hopefully they lock him up. For me, what has helped is selecting the battles I want to tackle. And many times, those battles are those that sort of revolve within my core responsibility. At some point, we're starting this sort of public service journey. Who knows where we will be in 5-10 years? But logically, the more time we spend within this space, perhaps the more senior we get to. And at those levels, you can make some more decisive decisions on these sort of issues. But I'm getting appointed as Commissioner Budget, and I know that the state's budget requires work. I know I can see a direct linkage between my budgeting processes and the impact on people's lives, and I'm focusing on that one guy who brought 100,000 and said, please give me. In all honesty, I'm not doing that. That's not why I'm there. I'm there to ensure how I can focus on the big picture changes that will have material impact on the people of Anambra and Nigerians, Yeah. So, I mean, we can't end this conversation, obviously, without talking about the role of the private sector in achieving some of these sort of big developmental plans and dreams of the governor, of the state, of the people who currently work every day in Ekiti. We do know where Ekiti ranks on the 4 different indicators of the World Bank Ease of Doing Business. We know that there's a federal agenda to get states to improve on those rankings. But in all honesty, that's World Bank's rankings. And yes, there is a direct linkage between those 4 indicators and how easy it is to attract business and to support businesses in the state. But there's also other fundamental issues. There's other fundamental issues like insecurity and all the different areas that also add to that sort of unease of doing business. So what are the plans in Ekiti State? Where do you hope to rank on these indicators? But more importantly, what sort of private sector do you envision in the next 4 to 5 years, even though I know you have 2 years left in the administration?
Thanks, Mark. It's a great way to wrap this up. It's there are a bunch of things. So first, I'll talk about doing business indicators. One of the things that we did very quickly, and I said we stole some from Anambra, we stole some from Kaduna. So I'm very happy to give Datijo and Governor Vice here. We took some of their ease of doing business initiatives. First thing was the governor set up a doing business steering committee, and we have monthly meetings. So we had 27 or 28 reform items, 27 reform items. 10 of those have been completed, 15 are kind of like in progress somewhere, 2 haven't started. Our goal is to ultimately be a top 3 state across all 4 indicators. We're 4th in 1, we're 24th, 19th, and 18th in the other 3. But there are a number of things that we've actually focused on. So things like digitizing tax payments and tax assessments, something that we've done. We're going now to digitize land administration, right? So GIS and a platform for you to put in your building plans, etc., make all your payments, all of those things. But a critical area for me, Ekiti, rank very poorly with things like access to utilities, right? And we're spending quite a bit of money, just providing potable water. And you'll be amazed at how important water is to doing business, right? Because it is a rocky area, right? So it's a lot. The water it is very bad. It's very low. So you've got to dig and dig and dig. In many cases, dig multiple boreholes. Now, as a business starting out, imagine you have to spend money digging 4 or 5 boreholes. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but in terms of just doing business, it's a significant cost. So we started to resolve some of these issues, right? And our goal is to ensure that by the next, the World Bank needs to first get its house in order, right? With all of the challenges with the methodology and some of the data and the current suspension of the ranking. But I said to people, we don't do this for the World Bank. We do this for the businesses in Ekiti. We do entrepreneurs. So it's not really about the ranking. The ranking is a nice to have, but more importantly for me, it's making it easier for people to operate. It's making it easier for capital to return commensurate profits. Now, the second part for me is on what are we doing to support private capital. The biggest thing for me is, look, we must take away all the challenges people have, right? So the work of the entrepreneur is to take risk and solve problems, right? Government should not be adding its own problems to the problems of the consumer that the entrepreneur. It's a very simple philosophy. There's no way to dance around it, right? So for us in Ekiti, we're very clear. You want your C of O, 60 days maximum, it's done, right? We've set up a one-stop shop now. In another 3 to 4 weeks, I believe our one-stop shop will be online, right? Banking says, for example, we've reduced right-of-way charges for broadband connectivity. Is it paying off in accessibility? Yes. We have a large telco looking to lay 260 kilometers of fiber in the state, right? And that's just one telco, and that's out of one reform, right? And to get that reform done, I can take a masterclass on what it took to convince the stakeholders, right, to let go of some of these things. You know what we do, Mark? One of the things I've learned is I speak in Naira and Kobo. I'm a banker. Let's bring this. So when someone says, we can't reduce this thing, we can't reduce this tariff, so I ask them, how much did you make from this thing last year? Sometimes, I believe we have to break eggs sometimes to make omelets. As a finance commissioner, you can't do that. But in my previous role, I used to do that a lot. And I'll tell the people, you know what? If this is a 200, I can't sit down here for 3 hours talking about a revenue line that you've earned 200,000 from all year. I will write you a 200,000 naira check from my pockets. Then go and sit down somewhere. Sometimes it has to be as dismissive as that, right? So people need to realize that, even though at the time I'm saying that, I might not actually have the 200K to write in, right? But, let's have the conversation that, look, you can't bring 8 government officials to talk about a revenue line that you earn 300K from. So one of the things we say, how do we make it easy for people? You want to set up a rice mill? We will give you all. Look, when we set up the dairy farm in Ikun with Promasido kept coming to us and saying, we don't trust you guys. But did we do the ESIA correctly? Yes, we did. Did we give them their C of O quickly? Yes, we did. Today we found first milk in that farm. In 5 years, when that farm is producing 10,000 liters of milk, no one is going to remember Akin, right? That farm today hires 40 people from the community. The problem I'm dealing with today is that the community is now saying we cannot afford to earn 1,000 naira a day to work for this, and 2,000 naira a day. I'm like, 3 months ago, you guys were earning zero.
Nothing.
Conversation. Now the guys are saying 30K is too little. I'm like, well, you guys, but at least it's a sign that the community has developed. The woman who sells food in that community is going to now start to sell more. And at the end of, that for me is real development. Someone who's earning that 30K can send their child to school. Can afford to say, my daughter should not hawk on the streets. My daughter should go to school. Because whatever she's earning from hawking, I can cover from this job I'm doing on this farm. So it's really important for me that we start to do things like that. The work you guys did with Sab Miller, fantastic work. It's the kind of things that we copied, right? Involving the community early, ensuring that there's development. And to your point, many of these plans, many of these investments, to the point you made earlier, with automation, maybe 10 or 20 people will work on the plant, right? But the value that that plant brings to the community is a lot more significant. That's the miss point. That's what guarantees upward mobility. And that is the job of government. I always say at the end of the day, government's job is about capitalization. It's really about saying for every individual in that society, do they have a chance to be the best person they can be? That is the job of government. You and I, due respect, are privileged people. We're allowed to make mistakes. You could have said to be a DJ. You were doing stand-up, or you were trying to get into Banky's band, right?
But they hooked me up.
Have taken that risk, because if you did it for 2 years, and you could have taken a gap year, you can still come back and say there's a way, there's a path. I've gone to a good school, I can still get a great job. We must think about those kids, those vulnerable people who have one strike, and so for me, that is ultimately the job of government. How do we ensure that these people can be the best they can be? End of conversation.
And we're about to wrap up here. I'm not sure we have enough time to take any more questions, because Akin, I pulled you out of the meeting to spend an hour, 24 minutes with us, which I believe has been very productive. We've learned so much. But there's a point you made about the importance of ensuring we stay committed to these causes, that the people who usually start off a project or create a policy are never really remembered when you start to bear fruits from that policy. I have this example at the top of my mind because I worked for two governments, right? So sometime in 2012, we started discussions with the Africa Capital Alliance on Isha Shopping Mall, right? So we went in there, had discussions with the community, got them, to get on board with this. We told them we were bringing a shopping mall. They said, "What is a shopping mall?" They thought it was your typical stores and markets. They said, "Why? They can build the market themselves." We took a few of them down to Lagos to show them what it's like and show them how they would benefit from jobs and also have some dividends paid to them. What am I saying? Under Peter Obi's government, to fast track it, we were successful. We closed the deal. We gave them the COO. Anambra owns 15% or so of that shopping mall. It's there today. It has an occupancy rate of about 78%. It has completely transformed the area that it's in. But that project was commissioned under Willie Obiano. And every other person who was in Anambra at the time doesn't quite remember, other than the governor on that day saying, my predecessor started it and I made a commitment to him that I will complete it. Many people wouldn't have known. He's the guy who's there that takes the credit, Yep. So it's important that we say that and make that point as many times as possible, because there's usually that issue with governments that come in and choose not to touch some of the jobs that some of the projects that have been commenced by previous administrations. If you don't do that, you're pretty much wasting the resources that are already sunk in there. You must find innovative ways to get the right value from it. Without action, states will continue, I have to read this, to incur liabilities that could boomerang back on the federal government at any time. Thus, it requires, in my view, joint effort of stakeholders within the ecosystem to play their part with government, bearing majority of that responsibility. The private sector paying its taxes, the CSOs keeping government in check, the office of the citizen ensuring the people with the right capacities, capabilities, and ideology emerge from the electoral process. At this point, Akin and all the different participants who joined in, I'd like to thank you all. Thank Enough is Enough. Thank all the other co-conveners. Thank the different teams who supported this effort to get us to come and share our own experience. We look forward to continuing these conversations with you and to offering potential solutions for making subnational finances in Nigeria more viable. Let's all commit to staying actively engaged as we all work together to ensure we implement all these different great ideas. Thank you so much, Akin. I know what it means to get you out in your first week. It is not easy. Everything is sort of around and you're extremely busy, and you created an hour and a half for this discussion. I'm sure the impact will extend past the amount of people who signed on. It's recorded so people can always go and watch it. The great questions from the audience, so thank you all. And on that note, we'll be signing off. Thank you, bro.
Last thing, when next year you and I in Lagos play football with Banky, I need to bring you.
No problem. No problem. I'll hold you to that. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
All right.